Right, good evening everyone. Being 6 p.m, I'll declare the special meeting of the Council for the 8th of May open. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Wadandi people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their culture, and to elders past and present, their descendants who are with us today and those who will follow in their footsteps. Record of attendance. We have all 8 councillors in attendance tonight. We now move to public question time. Is there any questions from the public? Nope. Move on to declarations of interest. I haven't received any. Notice of items to be discussed behind closed doors. We do have one item, 9.1, tender COB/5427, Southwest Regional Waste Management Services. This item is confidential under the Local Government Act 1995 due to the contract entered into or which may be entered into by the local government and relates to a matter to be discussed at the meeting this evening. There are no announcements by the presiding person with discussion, and we've received no petitions, deputations or presentations. We now move on to the reports. 8.1, Western Power proposed street lighting tariffs price increase for 2023-2024. Is there a mover for that recommendation? The Deputy President, Councillor Sciano. A seconder, Councillor McCleary. The Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, I got the news that these costs were being passed on to local governments for street lighting last year, and I was appalled at the time to hear somewhat 33% increase in the cost of the tariffs for street lighting. And that having only come in the last week, I appreciate and recognise the staff for obviously turning around this item and submission and having in front of us ahead of the special meeting tonight. I mean, what that realistically means for the Shire of Capel is $110,689 per annum extra on street lighting from the 1st of July. And yeah, I mean, that's almost 1% of rates, to put into perspective. Almost 1% of rates on a single increase in the cost of street lighting. I mean, I was just a friend and and local government colleague, the Mayor of Geraldton. To see the increase of some $400 and something thousand a year for the city of Geraldton, just simply from this one increase, it's just I think it's unbelievable. So, obviously endorsing a submission to be provided with the Economic Regulation Authority, detailing our strong opposition tonight. So, obviously look for councillor support for the officer's recommendation.
Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Councillor Sciano. Hit it on the nail. It's a big increase, and it's around at 1% when we're trying to manage things internally by cutting what we do in other areas. Probably by way of a couple of questions through you, Mr. President. It's a specific type of light where we get hit with the large increases, because it would seem that in the tally of things in the Western Power email there was a lot of LED lights that were a lot cheaper in the increase. And I'm wondering whether, I mean, a couple of them must have been Western Power, some got put in with the development, whether we can get out of them at some time. There must be a capital cost involved with that. So that's something to consider if this does eventuate. The other thing is, I was always under the belief, and I might be showing my age here, is that lighting was used as a base load for coal-fired power stations, and now we're moving away from those. That perhaps it's a way of making money rather than keeping base equipment at load. So yeah, there's some other considerations in there, and I think it's a fair slug, and I think we need to put the submission in along those lines. Thank you.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Councillor Tarantroy.
I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Sciano and Councillor McCleary. This increase is just shy of 44%, and I think this is it would have a huge impact on our residents in the long term if the Shire didn't have a plan to send a letter asking, you know, more information, and also, because this in real terms will end up costing the resident more money, and it's a huge increase. So, and that's from July 2023. So we don't have much time, and I applaud the staff for taking this tact to send, sorry. To send a letter of strongest opposition about the summary of the potential financial impact on the Shire and its residents. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers on the item? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you. I'm not going to be voting in favour of the motion tonight. Several reasons, and I could be completely wrong, but it's my understanding that all electricity in this state is subsidised by taxpayers. So we do not pay residential or local government or business. We do not pay the true cost per dollar of what it costs us to generate electricity, which means that our state government every year essentially subsidises our electricity prices. To me, that has two effects. Number one, it's hindering deregulation because they're getting government money, and our state government has said that they can't deregulate until we're actually paying parity for electricity prices. And the second issue I have is that it means that realistically, if you look at it on a bigger scheme, low socioeconomic areas have less solar panels. They are the members of our community that are battling to keep the aircons on and the heaters on and their hot water hot. And essentially their taxpayers are year on year subsidising the more affluent areas who are running their pool pumps and their aircon and their heating with probably not as much awareness as to their actual consumption as someone on a limited income. It's my understanding that this increase is reflective of bringing what we pay for electricity more in parity and to what it actually costs. And the sooner we get there, and the sooner that we can get some deregulation, and the sooner that we can get some competition, then hopefully power prices will actually start to come down. I also, as an aside, have done some desktop amateur research. It does appear that street lighting can be retrospectively fitted with solar, which would then essentially mean that the lights would stay on at night and we wouldn't be drawing any power from the grid at all. And I think if we're really serious about climate change, then things like retrospectively fitting street lights that run all night all across this country is probably one of the big things that us in local government can actually do to impact climate change. There's not a lot, but I'd be really interested to actually see what the carbon footprint is of the street lights around Australia. I think it would be astronomical. But that's an aside. But from a costing perspective, it's unfortunate. But for the longer term goal of where I think we need to be when it comes to our electricity and our energy, to me these prices, unfortunately, they have to come up.
Are there any other speakers to the item? Councillor Noonan, a question?
Thanks, Mr. President. Through you to the CEO or the director, whoever might be able to answer it. In the Shire Officer comment on page, page 14, it talks about the Shire having an inventory of nearly 2,000 mercury vapour streetlights and 170 Shire owned and maintained units. What's the per unit cost of the Shire owned units? Do we know? Do we have figures on that?
There would be a difference, given that the Shire owned ones were either put in as part of development and then are to be replaced by the local government, whereas the Western Power units are probably your standard that you see bolted onto the side of a power pole. CEO, do you have any further to that?
Through you, Shire President, yes, Shire President's right. So, I mean, the Western power poles are the ones that you see, either the older traditional wood style treated timber ones, or increasingly the new kind of aluminium ones. Certainly the ones that we maintain on Norton Promenade are much more kind of styled and featured. So they're the burgundy looking ones, much more of a higher spec than the Western Power poles. And obviously the difference there is that the Western Power maintain their poles and we maintain ours. So the supply charge is the same, but we obviously incur the maintenance costs of the ones currently on Norton Promenade.
So, follow-up question if I could. So, are they? Do you know if they're cheaper? If the ones that we own, are they cheaper than the Western, what we're paying Western Power for, or is it or more expensive? Just because what I'm wondering is it possible to, through developer contribution programs or even a Shire-backed program to, if they are cheaper, if we can do it better than Western Power through solar panels and incentives, setting up neighbourhood battery systems. If we could do it cheaper, I would like to take Western Power on, because I can tell you right now that Julora, which doesn't have any street lights.
I'm taking it as you're speaking to the item now, Councillor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, sort of, and it is a question.
Yeah. All right, but I'll take it as you're speaking to.
Yeah.
Speaking on the item
and working
and,
towards
right.
Perhaps proposing an amendment, although it might not necessarily be necessary. But yeah, so there's parts of the Shire, all of the rural areas, most of the rural areas of the Shire don't have streetlights. Stratham doesn't. So there are a lot of areas of the Shire, that get by very, very well with either no streetlights, or if they want some lighting, they'll put in solar lights. So I would like to investigate, or have perhaps move an amendment to include a point 3 to request the CEO to do some preliminary research or into the possibility of the Shire taking a more proactive role in providing its own street lighting. In effect, to send a signal back to Western Power and to the state government, very much to the state government, that a 43% increase is unfair. And it's propping up old technology, which needs to be, it needs to be phased out. So
Can I take that as a little bit of a question?
It's sort of a, well, it's a...
Are you moving an amendment, or you?
Yeah, moving an amendment.
You are moving an amendment?
Yeah. So item 3, request the CEO to conduct preliminary investigations into the Shire taking a more proactive role in providing its own street lighting where possible. With an emphasis on solar power. Solar power and batteries, yeah.
Is that your amendment on the board, councillor?
After where possible, if you change that to a comma, and then that's actually, and you can take out and battery at the end. It just needs on solar power. That reads fine. Yep.
Is that your amendment, councillor?
Yes, please. Yep.
All right. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Tarantroy. Councillor Noonan.
I think I've spoken to it enough.
Councillor Tarantroy.
When I read this motion, I actually wrote down in big green pen on top Docs on Tap Solar, and I'm so glad that Councillor Noonan has raised this point, because I was looking for that note and I didn't see it again. So, thank you. I mean, we know that solar's the way to go. It's the way of the future, and we've had I just remember in Dalup we've had when the street lights weren't working, they were replaced by solar, and yeah, so they didn't have the problem of coming on all day, so that was good. Yeah, so this would be a great thing. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers on the amendment? The Deputy President.
Mr. President, I just have a question. On page 14, reference to the Shire currently holds an inventory of 1,998 80-watt mercury vapour street lights poles. Now, just understanding, they would only be on verges that are Shire roads. That doesn't include verges that are also main roads. Because there's also mention in the report about HPS lighting, which is used for major intersections, which would not be our verges. So just confirming that within those 2,000 lights, that they are actually lights that are all on our verge.
I believe so, councillor.
Believe so? All right, thank you.
Are there any other speakers to that amendment? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the things I'll note is solar on its own won't work at night. It needs some sort of source power, so probably leaving the battery in there would have been a better idea. The other thing is that there's this equation now we're going to take on in this amendment. It's indicating that we're going to take on the rest of the management of lights, street lights, so we've got to be careful about whether we're accepting that or not. And then the other process is there's a certain level of lumens that are required in lights for street indications. Main roads have pretty well strict standards for achieving that. So I think there's a lot more work in there. I'm okay with doing an investigation, but I'm very mindful that in some cases, if solar power is so good, why is Western Power still sticking with the current mercury vapour lights when they should have a program to replace them to reduce the energy cost before they start whacking up the price? So yeah, I'm probably going to vote against the amendment because I think we need to push back.
Are there any other speakers to that item? Amendment, sorry.
Through Chair, could I ask a question?
Question, yes.
I will make a point. I would be happy to put battery back in there if power, but
I don't think that's a
my
question, Councillor.
presumption was that solar power includes not just,
Councillor, that's not a question.
it's more of a statement.
I take what you're getting at.
Yeah.
It-
How about you put-
this would need to either pass or fail, and then
Yeah.
a new amendment would need to be made to either add that or
Reinstate
move
it.
it in bulk again.
Yeah.
Yep. Is there any? Are there any other speakers to that amendment? Not, I'm a bit two ways on this one because I agree with the need to probably have a look at it and whether it's sort of relevant to this item. I think it's a great idea to have a look at how we can improve energy efficiency throughout the Shire, not only looking at just streetlights, but I think we probably should have left this focused on this initial Western Power price increase on street lighting. And this is something that we probably could have put through the corporate business plan, which we're working on right now, and bring it in line of something to work on in the next financial year. But then again, I don't really mind it either way. So, yeah, I think it's good. I'm not going to get probably stuck into the semantics of whether we put a battery in there. I think the intent is clear. That the council wishes to have a look at being more proactive regarding our street lighting. There's probably a few other things I could say with it, but it's probably more on the actual substantive item, so I might save those comments for later on. All right, are there any other speakers to that amendment? The Deputy President?
I just want to add it. I was going to hold it for my closing remarks on the subsequent item, but the thing that goes through my head when we're talking about investigating what, how we can manage our street lights in the future and what they should or shouldn't be, and whether we take some on ourselves and whatnot. I think councillors have also heard earlier that the Climate Change Adaptation Sustainability Framework will come to council in the next month or so. These are the sort of projects that are being talked about at that committee about, energy efficiency, the assets that we've got. This is, to me, was already something that was realistically on the agenda within that framework. So, I, coming into this discussion, here to talk about the cost shifting of state to local government. This is similar situation to Shire President. Never got a problem with having a looking into these things, but my view is that this is actually already on the table. It's a part of what we do through that framework, and it's very realistically something that we should consider about how we make the assets that we have more efficient. There obviously is still an increase being slogged onto the LED lights, but they make up such a small portion of the 2,000 watt mercury lights that we've got. So a bit one or the other here, really, because I think this is already a conversation that's being had, and I think it is also a separate conversation to what we are meant to be discussing here as well around making a submission and objecting, because we're not going to have this done by July 1, and that's when we're going to slog the first bill. So,
are there any other speakers on the amendment? If not, I'll put that amendment to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's a tie vote. The casting vote cast to maintain condition precedent is that the amendment is lost. So the casting vote is for the negative. All right, we move back to the substantive item. Are there any speakers for the substantive item? If not, I'll have another crack. I take the comments and the discussion that's happened around tonight, and as I said in the amendment, that I do support that initiative. But actually, the Deputy President just changed my mind a little bit there and saying we should target this towards what we're here to discuss, and that's the Western Power pricing decreases to what we actually have. And then you went and voted for it anyway. But yeah, and the other thing I sort of thought about, as well as we want to encourage reducing waste and e-waste and that sort of thing. We need to have a proper look at it. Not whacking solar panels on every single street light. The discussion that we really should be having with the state is baseload power should be renewable, and that solves all your issues about pollution from street lighting and those sorts of things. I really like the comments from Councillor Andrew around deregulation, and that's something I really agree with. I don't think you should be having to purchase over 1 megawatt of electricity before you can go talk to another supplier other than just Synergy. I think every home in Western Australia should have the choice of where they go, not just Synergy, where I think it's over 60% of retail electricity sale for Western Australia comes from. But I think for this item tonight, I think we need to just make that point that, we should be opposed to the increases to Western Power that they're proposing for our street lighting tariffs. And I do take the point on the subsidising, but at the end of the day, this is for street lighting paid for by local government itself. It's not coming out of state coffers, it's coming out of local government coffers. They're both taxpayers. It's not actually reducing any of that. How much is the state subsidising electricity? Instead of just being direct subsidisation from the state, it's just subsidising from the local government. That's a $100,000 increase that we're looking at. That's something I'd rather put towards our park maintenance, putting towards our footpath maintenance, all those sorts of things that local government is actually here to do, rather than just making the books on Western Power's side of things look a little bit better. I think the state needs to have a bit better look at how it manages electricity production, distribution and all that across the state, and not just look at putting that cost across to local governments who, in this instance with street lighting and providing that amenity, we don't really have much choice unless we just start going around pulling down lights or switching them off, which I don't think that's going to be an ideal outcome either. So I endorse the recommendation before us as is, and I hope it gets the full support of Council. Are there any other speakers to that item? Councillor Noonan, you've already spoken to it before you moved your amendment. Is it a question? I can't permit that, Councillor. Do you want me just to suspend standing orders and then you can have the discussion? We remain compliant. Okay, we'll do that. All right, I'll move that we suspend standing orders 10.1. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Andrew. Put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-2. You got that? And you got the against? Yep. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd just like to very briefly make the point that when South Australia had its electricity crisis a number of years ago, and Elon Musk made the, at the time, outrageous proposal that he would, within 6 months, solve their problem by putting in a massive battery system, there were naysayers and knockers from, breakfast time to tea time. It was people who said it couldn't be done. However, South Australia is now a leading state within the world as an example of what can be done with a little bit of initiative, well, a lot of initiative, and a willingness to be a model for the future. And I would hope that we, as a council and as a shire, would aspire to have a similar sort of role in Western Australia, and because we do need somewhere some council is going to do this. Is going to step up and say, we can put panels on. I know we've already got some panels on the roof, but we've got a lot of roof space here. We could be lighting Capel Main Street, and even if it is only the main street of Capel, and the streets around the W Community Centre and the multi-purpose youth precinct, even if it is only a few streets, at least it will be a signal. And if we can do that, particularly if we can do that cheaper than Western Power can do it, so that over time we end up saving our ratepayers money, particularly in the face of 43% increases. I think that I would hope that we would be bold enough to do that, and it really doesn't need a motion, a separate line item or an amendment to this motion in order to do that. I think that that's something that I would certainly hope that we would do as a council anyway, that we would investigate that. So yes, I will be certainly supporting the motion as is.
Are there any other speakers on the item? Councillor McCleary?
I'll try and be quick, Mr. President. Solar panels aren't the answer. It's more the storage of power and things like that going forward. That seems to be the issue that we need to get over, and I think that's a state issue. They're starting to develop in areas within Perth and working out. And there's also a whole lot of other options. We've got wind generation coming in, which is not so sun dependent, and that's happening off our shores here. So there's things happening. Hopefully that reduces the overall power cost going forward. But I think we need to push back on this so it does put it into the Western Power or Synergy area, such that they're looking at it to save the cost rather than look for alternatives, and it's being efficient themselves rather than have a whole lot of councils trying to be efficient, chucking all these things in that might put more pressure on the grid than it already is with solar panels. So I think there's a lot more consideration, a lot more professionals out there that are going to look at things and come up with a decent solution. You're right, South Australia did some things, that's a good solution. That's not something some small council in Capel can do, but we could be adversaries to that process, into the state along with other councils. So we don't, at short notice, we don't know what the whole direction is from all the other councils, what they're going to say in their submissions. So I think we stick to what we were doing with this motion and get it through, get some action going on that and see what comes out of it. Thanks.
Are there any other speakers to the item? If not, I'll move that we reinstate standing orders. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Terrantroy. Put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Are there any other speakers to this item? Does the mover wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, we've discussed an array of things here, from trying to better the Shire's efficiency in providing light and energy, which I think will be a discussion that will go forward through the process that we have with the committee, with the Climate Change and Adaptation Sustainability Committee. There's been a lot of fixation on solar panels, but I mean, we need coal to make solar panels because with the ban of West Australia's timber industry, the largest silica wafer producer in Western Australia will have to import coal, and already is importing coal from Europe to be able to make the silica to make solar panels. So we can talk all day about all these real issues, which I think there is a lot to discuss. But simply the item in front of us today is about blatant cost shifting from state to local government. And Councillor Andrews made some fantastic points about the state of the energy industry here in Western Australia. I think there's a lot to consider there. But for where we are at the moment, what we have is a state government smacking a local government with a 43-point-something% increase on a charge. Now, we're taking it from the ratepayer, taxpayer, and putting on the ratepayer. The difference is the ratepayer doesn't have $12 billion worth of surpluses in their back pocket to fund state government agencies. So I want to send a strong message, which is what this item is meant to do, by making it clear to the state government our strong opposition to this sort of cost shifting. So there's a lot more discussion to be had about what we do as an organisation as well. And I love a lot of the ideas that have been thrown around, but today we're taking a stand on cost shifting.
I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? And that's carried 7-1. All right, now move to items for consideration behind closed doors. We have a motion there. I'll move that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with the Shire of Capel Standing Orders Local Law 2016, 12.1G to consider the following confidential items. Tender COB/5427 Southwest Regional Waste Management Services. Is there a second for that? Councillor Noonan. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. I'll ask members of the public to leave the chambers for the duration of this item. Thank you. In accordance with the Shire of Capel Standing Orders Local Law 2016, I can confirm that the Council 1 confirms the preferred respondent for COB/2427 Southwest Regional Waste Management Services to provide waste management services within the Shire of Capel. 2. Authorises the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate with the preferred respondent to finalise the relevant contractual documentation to provide waste management services within the Shire of Capel to commence on the 1st of July 2023 for an initial term of 7 years, followed up to be 3 individual 1-year options. 3. Notes that the formal advice on the outcome of contract negotiations will be provided to councillors by the Chief Executive Officer prior to entering into the contract for waste management services within the Shire of Capel. 3. Subject to recommendations 1, 2 and 3 above, authorises the Shire President and Chief Executive Officer to enter into a contract with the preferred respondent for the provision of waste management services within the Shire of Capel. 5. Authorises the Chief Executive Officer to allocate appropriate funding as per completed negotiations as per point 2 and 3 above in the draft 2023-24 annual budget for each year of the term of the contract within the long-term financial plan for the gee, that word is getting me. For the implementation of waste management services detailed in the finalised contractual documentation as executed. 6. The agreement cannot be reached, if agreement cannot be reached with to provide waste management services, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate with the next preferred respondent with the view of finalising and executing the relevant contractual documentation and budget accordingly. 7. Confirms the preferred respondent for COB/2427 Southwest Regional Waste Management Services to provide waste services to the Capel Waste Transfer Station within the Shire of Capel. 8. Authorises the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate with the preferred respondent to finalise the relevant contractual documentation for the provision of waste services at the Capel Waste Transfer Station, providing the discretionary services as detailed within tender COB/2427 to commence on the 1st of July 2023 for an initial term of 7 years, followed up by 3 1-year individual options. 9. Notes that formal advice on the outcome of contract negotiations were provided to the councillors by the Chief Executive Officer prior to entering into the contract for waste services at the Capel Waste Transfer Station. 10. Subject to recommendations 7, 8 and 9 above, authorises the Shire President and Chief Executive Officer to enter into contract with the preferred respondent for the provision of waste management services at the Capel Waste Transfer Station. 11. Authorises the Chief Executive Officer to allocate appropriate funding as per completed negotiations as per point 8 and 9 above within the 2023-24 draft annual budget and for each year of the term of the contract within the long-term financial plan for implementation of waste services at the Capel Waste Transfer Station detailed within the finalised contractual documentation as executed. 12. If agreement cannot be reached with the preferred respondent to provide waste services at the Capel Waste Transfer Station, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate with the next preferred respondent with the view of finalising and executing the relevant contractual documentation and budgeting accordingly, or should this be unsuccessful, to not accept the discretionary portions of tender COB/2427. That's probably just my dyslexia getting in the way there. So yeah, it's the tender document is COB/2427. Oh, did I do it again? COB/5427. For the public record, we're there. All right, there being no further business on the meeting tonight, I'll declare the meeting closed at 7:21. Thank you very much for everyone's attendance. That's all right.